Welcome everybody to this webinar, which is put on by Moch, and it's going to be a virtual farm tour of the outdoor pig enterprise run by Fred Price here, who's on the screen, and he's going to tell us all about how he manages his pigs on his arable farm in Somerset. We're delighted to have Fred with us because he operates a regenerative farming system, and he's very keen on the soil health and his pigs grazing and not rooting up all the herbal lays that he puts in. So what's going to happen is going to give, I'll hand over to Fred shortly and he'll introduce himself, and then we'll have a virtual farm tour, which will then be followed by Fred giving a presentation about a bit more detail about his farm. Towards the end, there will be a question and answer facility. So anybody who wants to ask a question, you can do so by clicking on the question and answer icon at the bottom of your screen. And then I'll get the questions and I'll put them to Fred. So I think with that, I'll hand over to Fred. So Fred Price, welcome. I'll let you get on with it.
Oh, thanks for having me. So I'm Fred. We're down in Somerset, Gothany Farm. Pat asked me to put a video together, which I've not done before. So I've also not shared a screen before. So fingers crossed. Give me the thumbs up when it works, Pat.
I will. And I'll put myself on mute so that I can't interfere.
Currently just finished feeding round this mid-September morning. It's such beautiful weather at the moment. Seems as good a time as any to kind of take you through the rotational grazing plan that we've got here and answer the question, well, basically, how are we managing to avoid the pigs trashing the lays? So I'll flip the camera around and we'll get stuck in. So what's in the lays? This is quite a nice example. It's a third forbs, a third grasses, a third clovers. Different types of clovers here, grasses. We've reduced the ryegrass down to about 5%. There's a new one called Photan, which is a really digestible Fusarium. And herbs, the plantain seems to be doing particularly well at the moment. But in the base, you'll see probably little bits of yarrow and burnet. I mean, everything has its season, so by grazing, by not set stocking and coming back to it, you're building up the diversity within the sward. So what you're looking at here is a 4-acre field where we've got some of our growing / finishing pigs. And what we've done is we've divided the field into 3. So just over an acre in each block. And we've got 25 at the moment gilts grazing this block here. And the principle is a 42-day rest period with movement every 21 days. So imagine that 42 days ago, those pigs were down here. They spent 21 days there. They moved up here, 21 days, and this is where they were in August. And you can see where we've had a couple of weeks of wet weather in August. They've done quite an amount of damage. And then about 2 weeks ago, they came up here. So they'll have another week here, and then they go back here. By the time they return to that paddock that they're on now, it'll have had a 42-day rest. And the huge benefit of that is that where you get spells of weather in the grazing season, which, I mean, the pigs do get a bit aggressive with the ground, you get huge amounts of seed return, which builds a lot of resilience into the system. So, for example, here's a particularly bad area around where the trough was. I don't know if you can see, but you look at the amount of grass seed shed here. And that's more than we would have planted a year ago. So our lays really have the benefit of that 42-day rest. But it seems like a nice balance because when they come back to it, as you can see here, it's still incredibly lush. We haven't lost the goodness. So we found a nice balance between stocking rate and rest periods now. And this means we're really building the soil resource, but at the same time putting some beautiful nutrition into the pigs. And I guess it's just worth reminding everyone that the reason we're doing this is because the ration that we grow on farm, which is cereal and pulse, so peas or beans in a ratio of 1, and cereal, wheat or barley in a ratio of 2 to 1, is just too primitive to rely on its own as a ration. So we have to have forage that is high protein and full of different amino acids and proteins that the pigs can be healthy. That being said, I would say we've lost probably at least 2 months of growth rate as we've moved over to this system where we don't buy any feed in, and we only grow and feed what we can on the farm. But I guess my principle then is to just work backwards from that point and price accordingly, because this seems such a sensible system where we're building the soil resource all the time. So what do I mean by building the soil resource? Well, you have to understand the reason we have pigs here is because we're an arable farm, and I think to be really sustainable and regenerative and farming the way I want, which is without any inputs, we need the benefits that the pig system brings. In terms of the lays, building the resource means grazing about a third, trampling about a third, and leaving a third for regrowth. So here we're in a field where the pigs have just spent 21 days, and it's now going to have a 42-day rest. So we've left a good third of the plant, which means it will regenerate much quicker. We've trampled a huge amount of biomass, which is building soil organic matter and food for microorganisms and worms to take down in there. And of course we've grazed a third.
So one of the things I learned pretty early on with pigs is they will graze, but if the goodness is under the ground, they're not stupid and they're going to go right down after it. And when is the goodness not on the top? When is it underneath? Is with perennials at least. It's in the winter. So it's absolutely critical if we're going to use and look after these lays for 2 to 3 years in our system, that we're only using them between 1st of April down here in Somerset and probably the end of September. So what do we do when we're not on the lays? Effectively, this is where the pigs complement another part of our arable system, which is those gaps in our production cycle over winter, when we have been growing cover crops anyway. So what better way to use and monetize a cover crop than put pigs on it over winter? And we've tried a few different strategies and a few different mixtures as well. I've got to be honest, I've never been happy at the end of the winter, as I'm sure many of you will feel the same way. But on the back of last year, which was particularly difficult, where we did lots of frequent moves, so we gave them fresh ground probably every week when it was really wet. What I've done this year is try to be much more extensive, so grow more cover crops, reduce the stocking rate, but from a management perspective, not be moving them every week. So ring fence a large area of cover crop and put a group in there, and try and plan the winter accordingly, so we're not having to do too much movement between the groups with weaning and things like that. So I'll show you some of the cover crops now. So this is a field that was winter wheat this year, and we chase the combine out the field and we plant a mixture of brassicas, 2 or 3 types, tillage radish, mustard. There's some winter vetch in here for winter hardiness, and then we've got some oats and some ryegrass, not ryegrass even, forage rye. And so this is probably going to be late winter, December, January, February when it's ready. If you look over here, when we come out of the herbal lays, in this case this is a lucerne field, we've undersown it with some brassicas, so we can get on that earlier this winter. So from 1st of October we got good ground cover, and we'll let the pigs go to work in that. So if I show you now, it looks fantastic and lush and lucerne. But when you come down into the base, in theory, we've got some brassicas ready to be a bit more winter hardy, because lucerne looks fantastic now, but over winter it goes really woody and empty. In actual fact, what's happened here is we've had such a wet
end of August, the Lucerne's kind of got ahead of ourselves and probably smothered out some brassicas. But there's one there, you see. I found one to prove it. And then we also plant the same mix as after the wheat, but about a month earlier. So if I show you the difference, never hang around farming, just here. So we basically will work our way around, and we've got a huge area this winter. We're very lucky that we're an arable farm, and we've got the scope to do this. But I think I'm excited and a bit more confident going into this winter, particularly with the last winter behind us. If we can get through that, I feel like our system is quite resilient. Yeah. So this is the same mix planted in July rather than August. So the vetches are a lot bigger, winter hardy. The brassicas have put on a huge amount of growth early on, which is nice. And then you've got the cereals filling out the base. So what was a kind of cost to our arable system is now a huge benefit. The pigs will have fun in here over winter, I think. So if we start at the beginning, this is the breeding field for now. So we've got 3 groups of 10 sows. So there's 10 sows out here that farrowed about 4 weeks ago. And we follow the same grazing strategy. So they haven't been on this piece yet. We've just let the fence down yesterday. They're just getting used to it. And we wean at 8 weeks. Then the group of weaners will stay together until 4 months, when we split them into boars and gilts, and then they go on to different pastures, but all under the same grazing strategy. So 21 days, and back to the start. I think we were worried about litter numbers a bit, but I think I put that down a lot to my AI practices. I think we've really tightened it up now. So we wean the sows off the piglets rather than the other way around, and we wean them up to the roundhouse, which is the building up here, where it's a nice controlled environment, and we can put a boar right next to the pen and really heat detect much more effectively than in the field without a boar. Then we AI them, and then we run them with our stock boar for like 7 weeks, just to make sure there's no returns, or if there is any returns, that we're mopping them up. There's nothing more satisfying than seeing a 2 or 3 week old piglet munching on grass. When I'm quite convinced that the year on year we're improving our herd's ability to digest the grass, because they're being exposed to it from such a young age. We probably pushed a bit hard this year, and when I say pushed a bit hard, I mean withheld feed post-weaning, just to see how hard we could push them. But I think that, I got to be honest, that batch didn't look too clever. So yeah, we are a low input, but we have to keep an eye on what they're looking like. But one of my biggest worries was actually not using high protein creep feeds, well, it seems possible to do it without it. As I say, the net effect over the 10 months that we finished them in is about 15 kilos or 2 months. So we were finishing to 100 kilos dead in 8 months, and over the course of the last year or so, we've dropped to finishing at 85 kilos in 10 months. But we just adjust the price accordingly, because this is what our system is capable of producing. So this is what we're growing on farm and feeding out. It's just a simple mix of rolled barley and rolled peas, in this case, 2 to 1. No mineral, no additive, nothing. And actually I think it is a two-way process. It's been a learning curve, knowing how much to feed, because if you provide more feed for them, they're not going to graze. And also we need them to graze, because this feed is of poor quality. So it's a delicate balance to strike, but ultimately the pig is good for it. So at the moment, these guys are at peak lactation, and we're probably giving them, there's 10 sows, probably about 3 to 4 kilos a day ahead, something like that, which is a bit lame. But we generally will drop that right down to maybe 1 kilo a head a day when they're on good ground in April, May. and they're on this grass. The sow's particular capacity for forage is just humongous. I'm beginning to realise that it's a similar principle, although you've got to be careful with the weaners, because if you provide feed brought to them, that's what they'll eat. If you keep them a bit hungry, so it's generally a noisier experience walking around the farm these days, if you keep them hungry, they will eat it, and it's really satisfying. And these girls will be literally out here all day doing this. We've just let them have this new piece, so this has had 42 days rest. Couldn't resist a close-up, sorry. You can't really get bored of watching this. That sound is completely addictive. So the last 2 months of our finishing system, so that's between 8 months and 10 months, sometimes more like 6 months and 10 months during the winter when we're trying to reduce our footprint outside, we finish in the roundhouse, which is this rather ugly monstrosity behind me. It's effectively, for me, the roundhouse is about the closest kind of indoor system I can get to embracing some of the benefits of the pigs being outside. So it enables me to finish a forage-based diet. So we feed a TMR, light and airy. There's a hole in the top of the roof, so it feels kind of fresh in there. The benefit of the TMR is it enables the pigs to have something to do all day. You know, they'll go through the ingredients in order of what they prefer, the barley first, then the peas, and then they'll go back to the silage part of the TMR at the end, which is actually what I'm mixing up here. So it's really simple. We put a bale of lucerne and grass silage in, although we're moving over to just cut the herbal lays for silage from next year. And then we put 300 kilos of rolled barley and 150 kilos of rolled peas or beans, whichever we've got, we're working through. And then the mixer wagon opportunely spits it out over the side. The mixer wagon mixes it up, and we spit it out into the pig feed. So it's about, the bale of lucerne's about a ton, the barley's 300, and then 150 of pulses. So we're probably around about, in terms of the diet we're giving them, is about 60+% silage or forage. But in reality, the pigs probably aren't utilising all of the 60%. We do get some wastage. And that mix will last us between 2 and 3 days in the roundhouse. So we feed effectively ad lib. And the pigs in there between 8 and 10 months old, they'll be sort of 100 kilos live weight. They will eat anywhere between 4 and 7 kilos a day a head, something like that. So here is the mix being made. Really quite forage based, you can see. It gives them something to do and pick through all day. We use exactly the same machine to mix the dry mix. We just don't put the lucerne silage in. Tip it out on the floor and scoop it into the bin. It's a super low cost system. I think simplicity is like so important. We can stop ourselves doing things because we think we need this, that and the other, but really you don't. I bought this mixer wagon 2 years ago for 600 quid, so it's not heavy expenditure. So right now I'm in the roundhouse with the finishes. Probably look at me in a minute. They're pretty chilled in here. It's quite nice, it's pleasant. We clean it out every 5 weeks, and it's amazing how even stood in here now, there's 100 animals in here. Everyone's very happy. And if I show you behind me, you can see the feeders with the TMR ration in. So they'll just keep picking at that all day. So probably the worst part of our system, but it does enable us to really line the footprint and make the most of the outdoor part of the diet, particularly, you know, December, January, February in the southwest, where something like Wales, rain is our biggest pressure. And it also has a really brilliant handling system. So loading and sorting, and we've got problems injecting is really stress-free on them and us.
Are you there?
I am there, yes. What happened there? Is that the
That
end?
was the end, yeah.
Oh,
I'm afraid that's
end.
all. Yeah.
Oh, right. That's good. So thank you very much for that video. I'll ask you one of the questions that's come in already, which was about the rainfall. What rainfall do you expect annually in your area?
Anywhere between 850 and 1,000. The last 2 years we averaged over 1,000 mil both years.
Right, I don't know what we get in Wales, but some parts will probably get more and some parts will get less, I would think. So that's one of the questions that came in. So are you now going to proceed to your presentation? And then we'll ask questions again at the end.
Yes.
Or would you like another question now? Well, we might get the questions answered in your presentation.
That's, yeah, maybe I've just tried to cover a few bits of detail in the presentation. It's nothing fancy, yeah.
Right, so we'll hand you back, and I'll
Right.
go back on to getting rid of me. And
I should be an expert in this now. Hang on. Hopefully you can all hear me. Pat, do you want to let me know if that's okay?
that's fine. Yeah, did you hear me?
Yeah.
Good. I'll be quiet again now.
Okay, so Pat just asked me to put some detail, perhaps that we didn't cover in the video. So we're at Gothany Farm. We're down in Somerset in the southwest of the UK, which I feel is fairly similar to climatically to some of the areas in Wales, at least that I've visited. We are farming about 380 acres, of which about 250 is family owned, and we run the other 130 acres on a 6-year farm business tenancy. And our two farm gate products are the pigs and cereals, which we sell direct to bakers. Over the last 10 years, I've transitioned the farm from a farm that produced commodities to a farm that produces, well, food, for want of a better word. So every product that we produce, I know the person it's going to. We have a deep relationship. And that's really enabled me to, I guess, to start from the perspective of how I want to go about farming, rather than having to work back from a price that I don't control. And that core principle that Pat said at the beginning is a kind of regenerative agroecological approach. And what I think I mean by that is it's trying to build a system, a farming system, where I'm continually improving the soil and the ecosystem. In fact, I'm relying on the soil and the ecosystem to drive my productivity, rather than a chemical can, a fertilizer bag, or intensification of feed. So those are the guiding principles of the farm. And actually that also explains why we have pigs on the farm. 10 years ago, we were just farming arable crops, oilseed rape, barley, beans, wheat, anything we could put through a combine and lose money on. And actually, if you take two facts, I'll just give you them. The first is, I think that roots and shoots is what really very affordably and also in the best way possible build soil health. They create soil structure, and they drive the biological activity in the soil. So as an arable farm, thinking about soil health, I had cover crops in my system already. Something like 30% of photosynthesis, all the carbohydrates produced by photosynthesis are pushed out by any plant to feed soil biology. So we were growing cover crops, but I also wanted to stop using herbicides, and perennials rather than annual crops are a great way of keeping weeds on their toes. You know, you're constantly shifting your selection pressure from annual weed species like cleavers and wild oats and mayweed over to more perennial species like docks, nettles, thistles. So by having a system in place which has a perennial and annual system in balance, has really enabled me to farm without any inputs whatsoever. And then if you put that in the context with my arable hat on, with my pig hat on, knowing that probably 70 or 80% of the cost of growing a pig is feed, I basically set about designing a system of pig production that delivered perennials and paid for cover crops, and therefore was forage based. So that's basically, we've reverse engineered the pig system in order to deliver these kind of benefits. And what we've ended up with is a 4-year rotation, which is 2 years of herbal lay. Then we come out of the herbal lay and we grow a cereal. We actually intercrop all our cereals with pulses now. Over the winter, we then grow our cover crop in that window after harvesting the cereal and before planting the next cereal, which will be a spring cereal. And as I say, that 4th year, we actually undersow, we've experimented with undersowing the lays into our cereals. So we've almost got a continuous rotation, and it's really seamless. Also means you skip a kind of growing season. If you've undersown your lay into a cereal crop, it gets away a lot quicker than planting it in the autumn and waiting to graze until the next spring. The farm is categorized as medium clay loam. Actually, it's a big range, as I'm sure anyone with land will know. In the same field, you can go from lighter stonier right through to heavy clays, but we're not on the heavy side, we're on the lighter side. And I know Pat already asked a question about rainfall, so I put a slide in. We are, I think, quite typical of a wet kind of UK climate, and here we've got the last 12 months. I just pulled it up today. And actually we've had a wettish 12 months. I think the average is between 850 and 1,000. The last 2 years we've averaged over 1,000 mil a year. But what's really important is to know when it comes, and all of ours generally is coming between October and March effectively. And also the fact that we're increasingly getting prolonged dry spells in the spring, and the herbal lays are incredibly resilient, deep rooting, and we don't have any problem with forage production at all. So herbal lays, this is just a bit more detail. You saw me showing them in the video. There's a whole list of things there. When we started growing them 4 or 5 years ago, we actually had 25 or 30 different species. In principles, have remained the same, a third, nicely balanced between grasses, clovers, and herbs. Generally speaking, the herbs are nutritionally dense. The clovers at about a third, or 30 to 40% of the mix, mean that there's enough nitrogen fixed to produce good quality grasses, which is where the metabolizable energy is coming from. But in terms of grasses, we do keep the ryegrass down in this mix, which is one we planted this year. We keep the ryegrass down to sort of 6%, because it's just a pathetic modern imitation of some of the more resilient grasses. And it doesn't root well, it doesn't graze well. It's designed for high input monoculture systems, really. What I think has been the biggest learning curve and the most exciting thing for me is working out the grazing strategy for the pigs. And I was showing you the 21 days on, 42 days off, and that's really key. And equally key for me is being really strict about when they're on the lays, which is only April to September. So in a week's time, we'll be moving all of the pigs on the farm off of the lays and putting them onto the onto the cover crops. And I've put a rough idea of stocking rates. I mean, these obviously depend on the field, on the weather conditions and things like that. But that's worked out over the last 12 months. That's kind of what we're looking at. So about 3 sows an acre plus their litters to 8 weeks old. And we work the growers and the finishers more on a live weight basis, because obviously they're changing weight. So me telling you there's 30 or 60 doesn't mean anything, but between 2 and 8 months old, when all the growers and finishers are on the lays, those are the numbers we're looking at, about 0.5 ton an acre in terms of live weight. And then, as I say, October we pull everything off and put them on the cover crops, October to March. And as in terms of the strategy of grazing, effectively this is the exact opposite of what we're trying to do in the grazing season. So in the grazing season, we're trying to be really dynamic with our movement and high stocking rates, moving them frequently, really inspired by a lot of the pasture-fed beef systems, mob grazing. That's where a lot of these ideas have come from. Just applying them to monogastrics has been a bit different. But as I say, in the winter, it's completely the reverse. So we basically try and be as extensive as possible, keep the number of animals per acre as low as we can, and also be clever about which fields we're using when, because getting to the fields is what creates just as much mess as where the pigs are. So with that in mind, what we're doing now is fencing whole fields, 10 or 12 acres, and leaving a mob in there for a set amount of time, rather than having to go out and move them between one field and another, and chain move fences and things like that. So as you can see, the stocking rate comes right down, less than a sow an acre, and down to sort of 100, 125 kilos of live weight an acre. When you're building your cover crops, I guess there's some things to consider, and the first thing is, don't just plant one thing. You want a mixture of different things, budget permitting, because they all have different niches in the soil. They all do better in certain seasons, not other seasons. With the variability we have at the moment, that diversity really pays for itself. Often plants are complementary as well, so they do better and more productive as a mixture than they do on their own. Then I make sure I choose warm and cool season crops in my mixtures. So the warm season crops, what I mean is like spring crops that are used to going into cold ground, have short growing seasons, and so they get away really quickly when you put them in the autumn, because the soil is warm. But the disadvantage is they're not generally winter hardy, but they give a nice lot of quick growth. But then having the cool season crops like the vetch in there, and also some winter cereals, forage rye for instance, they are a little slower to get going, but they stay there, and come December, January, February, you've still got a good plant stand. And then establishment is really critical. This is not a throwaway crop in between the productive parts of our system. This is absolutely an important productive part of our system, so we put just as much care and attention into planting them, and that means, most importantly, it means planting them in good time. So you saw in the video the difference that 3 weeks can make between July and August. So if you're late and you get it into September, then you're putting pigs onto crops that haven't only put 3 or 4 inches of growth on. So yeah, getting them in good time, looking after them well, treating them like any other profitable crop on the farm is absolutely critical. And I do generally go for annual species because they're capable of putting on a lot of biomass really quickly, and I avoid perennials, with an exception, which is chicory, which seems to get away really quickly and is perfectly suited to the lays, perfectly suited to the cover crops. Right. So these are some of the species that we use in the cover crops. As I say, I've broken it down into 4 different categories. I like to use a cereal, a legume, what I've put as others because I'm not quite sure what they are, and then brassicas. The brassicas are really great at getting away quickly, putting on biomass, picking up, scavenging loose nitrogen, keeping it in the field, and converting it to organic matter. And I will generally plant 3 or 4 brassicas. They're cheap and cheerful, and they are a small seed, so they get away with being planted quite shallowly and quite primitively and doing well. Phacelia buckwheat chicory, more expensive, so only if they're affordable. But buckwheat and phacelia in particular have 60 or 70-day growth habits. So you could plant them and they'll set seed and flower within 60 or 70 days. So they're perfect for this time of year, getting them in July, August. By October, November, you've got a 3-foot high crop that's flowering. The pollinators love it, which is also important in our system. And then a legume in there. Legumes generally, I don't mean clovers, I mean annual crops. So spring peas, spring beans, put in the autumn, they get away really quickly and produce some nice biomass. And vetch is more hardy over winter. And then cereals, again, spring cereals, they respond quicker in the autumn, they get going quicker. And then something that's a bit more winter hardy, like the forage rye, in the mix as well. Where are we here? So those are some of the cover crops. These are photos both taken in last year in probably December, January. So you can see, you know, even under intense pressure, we're able to deliver this kind of quality of forage in the pig diet. What have I got here? So yeah, there's a photo there of the roundhouse being fed with the TMR. This is a kind of a summary of the idea that we don't buy anything in. We've built a ration and a system around what we can grow on the farm and what the farm can carry. So it's 100% homegrown. We use about 150 tons of cereals and about 75 tons of pulses every year. And they're grown together in the same field. And these are rough ideas as to what we are feeding. So the breeders get, on average, over the course of a year, about 3 kilos a head a day. But it goes up in the winter and at peak lactation, and goes down in months where they're not at peak lactation and there's a lot of good grass in front of them. April and September are good examples of that. And then I've got there the age and a rough live weight figure. So 2 to 4 months old, 35 kilos, etc. And a rough idea of what we would be carrying out to them. And all of that is a cereal pulse mix, 2 to 1, super simple and super primitive. Primitive because things like beans and peas have a set of proteins in that are anti-nutritional, which is why in the UK you would struggle to deliver a dry diet based exclusively around peas and beans. So the advice is not to go above 14% dietary inclusion before you get impacts on gut and growth. And so that's really why our system is so dependent on delivering some forage, because, you know, if we're ended up feeding 5 kilos a head a day to a pig that's 60 kilos, they're going to get problems. But if we can get away with only feeding them 2 kilos and they're balancing that with 4 to 6 kilos of forage that they're grazing, then the diet works. So that's, the forage isn't just a, you know, take a nice photo or a pig being outdoors so you can tick a box in terms of what the consumer wants. Is absolutely critical part of our system. If we fail to deliver forage at any point in the year, the diet that we're feeding is substandard. And the TMR I've just noted down there. So as you see, it's about 70% forage, 20% cereal, and 10% beans or peas. But as I said in the video, we do get a lot of wastage. So they might only be 40% of their diet is coming from the forage. The other nice thing I said at the start, our other farm gate product is the grain that goes direct to bakeries. Well, we've got these really nice efficiencies from that small food system where the some of the wheat that gets milled and sifted, so like a fine white flour, will get probably 30% of that back as wheat feed or bran, and that directly displaces rolled barley or whole wheat that we've been feeding in the diet. So it's a really nice tie-up. And then the idea that I can go to the bakeries where they've got our sausage meat and the sausage rolls, and the sausage rolls are made with the white flour of which the bran went into the sausage meat, just seems like a really sensible, neat system. And there's lots of kind of like parts of our farming system talk to each other and complement each other like that. in a way that when we were just an arable farm, that just didn't happen. It was always relying on external inputs. This is just a photo of the intercrop, so you can see what I mean. So there's a diverse crop of wheat, and it's got the beans there, the fava beans growing with it. We combine it all together and then separate it out in the grain store. Some numbers. So the green line is actually, so the only line that is on the graph that is statistical, i.e. every time we kill a pig, I just plug the numbers in, and so it keeps populating the data, is the black line in the middle. But I've just manually drawn on the red line and the green line because our system obviously is changing, because this is based on 4 or 5 years worth of data. And so I think the green line of growth is probably where we're at now. So we're finishing 10-month-old pigs at about 85 kilos dead weight. And if you rewind, say, 4 years ago when we were buying in feed from our local feed mill with soya and at a kind of 18% grower ration and 60% finished sour ration and finisher ration, we could easily finish to 100 kilos in 8 months. Now, of course, the quality of the pork was less, and the input cost was higher, but the growth weight was substantially higher. So part of what we're looking at now is relying on mixing up the genetics. So instead of breeding a pure Tamworth, we're putting half of our sows to a Duroc semen, having talked to one of your own, Forest Coal Pit Man, during lockdown, and he was explaining to me about the benefits of hybrid vigor, so I think that should start. Be interesting to see that play out over the course of the next 12 months. But as I say, the green line is where we're at. So we have 3 groups of 10 sows. Given they're on a 6-month cycle, because we're weaning at 8 weeks, we're basically weaning about 70 pigs every 2 months. And over the last 12 months, our litter numbers are probably averaging about 7.1. They did dip right down to the low 6s. But I think a combination of improving our heat detection and AI skills has really bumped that up. So that's about between 400 and 500 a year, something like that. And in terms of the footprint of the farm, grazing wise, we're using about 50 acres a year. We cut about 14 acres that makes the silage for the TMR ration. And then to grow the 150 tons of cereals and 75 tons of pulses, we use about 150 acres. As I say, we're in a very much organic system, and the yields are lower as a result, hence the large acreage. And what we're trying to do is we look at the farm as a whole rather than as each enterprise, because I think it's really important to recognise that the beneficial parts, the productive parts of our system, aren't necessarily the parts where you see a sale price attached to. So you have to look at the system as a whole when you're costing things out. So I always look at something which I call like a farm gross margin rather than a crop gross margin, as I would have done 10 years ago. And we're trying to aim for between 350 and 450 pounds per hectare profit. So that's cash profit, surplus each year with which to reinvest in the farm or pocket. And the last 12 months we've reached about 380 pounds a hectare profit. And so we work back from the number that we want to hit per hectare and to achieve our pricing. So our pigs we sell at £2.75 a kilo dead weight. And to give you an idea, that's changed from about £2.20 a kilo dead weight when we were nearer the red line on the graph. So just a bit about the breeding. The herd is pure Tamworth, the breeding herd. But really, I'm not biased. I'm not really interested in. Well, I like the idiosyncrasies of the different breeds. What I'm really after is the fact that it is a rare breed, that it is therefore slower growing, which is what our system requires, which is a pig that's capable of developing a over a long period with a highly kind of extensive diet. And as I said earlier, we're just trying to mix up the genetics a bit for a bit of improved health, but mainly vigor, in response to losing a couple of months growth rate. Where's it all going? Well, really, we've kind of flipped the whole system on its head since February. In January, January this year, we were doing 70 or perhaps 80% of our stuff was going to 2 London restaurants who would buy 7 or 8 pigs a week. And then we've been working with them, Kill and Smoke and Goat, for 4 or 5 years. It's a really meaningful and deep relationship. And for me, it really changed what farm to fork meant, or farm to table meant, because they really tried to understand what I was trying to achieve on the farm and accommodate that in their processes, in their recipes, in their whole approach to the supply chain. Coming out of lockdown, as the restaurants opened up again and started taking stock, we have kept back stock so that we can keep supplying them. But we have looked to push a more diverse market as a result and try and be a bit more resilient, because it was a bit of a shock to the system in February and March when they just stopped taking pigs altogether. So we now probably only send them a third of our stuff. There's a local charcuterie maker called Paul, who's based at Westcombe Dairy, just in Fferm, about an hour away from here. He's taking about 30%. And the bakeries really were a lifesaver during lockdown when the restaurants were completely shut, because we already had good relationships with them for the grain. And they were able to just reorientate small agile businesses and shop front for their supply chains, of which my pork was one of them. So they did their own box schemes, or they incorporated pork into their products like sausage rolls. And so they're probably now taking 25% of the pigs that we're producing. And then last of all, I started doing some meat boxes, so about 15% a month. We use the same butcher who handles the supply chain to the restaurants, and he hangs the meat and processes it for us, and then we pack it off, which is been a bit of a learning curve, if I'm honest, because I'm used to dealing with, say, 4 or 5 people, and I think that's the way I work. I like having sort of long narratives that have built up over many years, and trying to learn how to let people jump in when you've been doing something for 5 years, and it's just been a learning curve. Maybe that's not my skill set, but it's very rewarding when people send you a photo of their Sunday dinner. So it's a reminder that I'm producing food and not some widget or commodity. The only other thing to say about the market is I discovered early on that particularly in terms of restaurants, if I said to them, I only supply whole pigs, I don't, a pig isn't a loin. A pig is a loin, a belly, a leg, and a shoulder, and all the rest. It's a great way of filtering out those kind of restaurants that really want to understand how the farm operates and change what they're doing, rather than the kind of restaurant who just wants to put your name at the bottom of the menu and tick that box that says, local or sustainably or traceably sourced. And the only other sort of idiosyncrasy to what we're doing is all of our pigs we will hang for 4 or 5 weeks before we process them. And we found that being that they're slow grown, the fat can hold the moisture, and the carcass ages really nicely, and it does change the flavour completely. It just really makes it more tender and intensifies it. It's really been a game changer in terms of the quality of the eating quality of the meat. And that's it. Thank goodness for that. You don't have to listen to my voice too much longer.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much. I could listen to you all day talking about your pigs and your farm.
You nearly have, Pat.
Indeed. Before I ask you the questions, I'll just let the people that are listening know about a few things that are coming up with Mentor Moch in the next few weeks. We've got on the 7th of October, we've got Alex Tomset, our vet, talking about respiratory disease in pigs. And then on the next day, we've got a joint event with Farming Connect, which is about pig nutrition. So we've got Andrew Marriage and Sean Southwell from 4 Farmers, who are going to talk about dietary requirements of pigs, which will be the total opposite to what you've said, probably. And then we've also got a new fact sheet out, which is the autumnal problems with pigs. So that's the sort of latest things going on. We've had a few questions in while you've been talking. So the first one was somebody asked if you'd moved away from strip grazing.
Yes, so over the winter we were doing strip grazing, effectively giving them a fresh batch of ground as we saw fit, but generally not more than every week. But we're just trying a much more extensive version of that this year, so destocking. The strip grazing worked well because it meant regardless of the weather, you always had something good to go to. But in terms of management time, it was more intensive, and getting to the fields and doing all that work is what created a lot of the mess. So we're just trying a different system, but I have nothing against it. We're just seeing if we can better it, I think, from the pig perspective.
Right, that's good. We've got more questions. So another person wanted to know, why did you originally go with Tamworth pigs, and would a less destructive breed not have been better?
Interesting, loaded question. A less destructive breed. I was talking to a friend of mine, Tom Adams, down at Coomshead, which I believe you visited, Pat. Have you visited?
Yes, we went to see him.
So he used to keep Mangalitses and recently tried middle whites because he was convinced that the reason the lays were getting destroyed was because of the breed, well, amongst other things. And actually, I think even with the middle weights, they still went through the lays pretty quick. So it says to me, I think it's less about what breed, it's more about what system and the composition of the lays and how you're managing them that has an impact on whether you can keep the lays or not. But then why did we end up with the Tamworth? I guess a bit of luck and very little judgment, but they are a nice breed in terms of they're a good size. I think our customers, some of the restaurants like a pig at sort of 85 kilos, and the charcuterie likes it slightly heavier, 95, 100. But when we really could put condition on the pigs with a more intensive diet, we could finish the Tamworth at 120 kilos, create an absolute monster pig. And so I think as a frame, it's quite versatile for both markets, both pork and cured products.
Good. We've got 2 more questions. One was from a person who was interested to know at what temperature your carcasses are hung at when they're hung for such a long time.
I'm afraid that's not my area of expertise. Philip Warren butchers down at Launceston handled that whole process for me, and indeed with the people that suggested it.
They have a special kind of room, don't they, to hang them in? It's a special, is it one of these salt rooms? Yeah,
they actually use the same room they age all their beef in. But yeah, they've got one of these Himalayan salt walls, and they keep it. Yes. They monitor the humidity and the temperature very closely. Yeah.
So
it's cold.
And the last question was from somebody who wanted to know how the sows got on farrowing outside all year round.
Yeah, absolutely fine. And in fact, I think that's the highest value part of my system, to be outside all year round. You know, watching them nest build with whatever materials, whether it's December with, you know, huge kale stalks, or it's August with dried grasses, is really very rewarding. We also, I don't know if you noticed from the video, but we group them all together. So all 10 sows are in the same pen. There's 10 arcs there. Sometimes all 10 arcs get used. Sometimes 8 or 9 get used. Sometimes they farrow outside. Sometimes they farrow inside. We just really let them get on with it and trust them to do the right thing.
Good. So if you, I'm going to ask you a question now. If you have to treat anything for medication wise when they're in a group of 10 sows and all the little piglets, does that generate a problem? How would you get hold of something that needed some veterinary attention?
So generally speaking, in terms of injecting, which I guess is the first point of intervention after you've noticed something wrong, because they're actually in a very relaxed environment, they're easy to get to, and they're calm and they're safe. I use a injection gun that I saw with a friend who has cattle called the Masterject, and it just means you don't have to actually go with a syringe, which I find very difficult. So that's been a great tool for managing them outdoors. And in fact, so all of our breeding herd we vaccinate twice a year with for erysipelas and parvovirus. So twice a year everything gets jabbed, and generally speaking you might get 7 out of the 10 sows before they get savvy in the morning feed, and the last 3 in the evening. And to be perfectly honest, I think they get more spooked by the spray that you're using to mark them than the actual injection. So yeah, it hasn't been a problem. And when something escalates and gets more sick than that, generally speaking, they aren't that mobile. So it's not so much of a problem.
Good. Now the final question, I think that a lady wanted to know if the pigs have a big setback when they go inside at weaning, but they don't go in at weaning, do they? They go in after they've been in the...
So everything stays out, everything's born outside. The sows never come in apart from the week when we're heat detecting and doing the AI. We wean at 8 weeks old. We take the sows away, so the group of 70 weaners is just still in the same place that they were. And then they will stay outside until they're 8 months, and they won't come into the roundhouse until the last 2 months of their life. Occasionally, the last 4 months, depending on the weather in the winter, and we feel the need to bring more inside.
So they're well established and growing like mad or growing well before they come in. Well, thank you very much. That was absolutely brilliant. So what I think we need to aim for now is we need to aim for, once this virus is gone, having another trip down to visit you, I think.
Love to have you down.
Can see it in action. So thank you very much, Fred. That was amazing. And thank you very much to everybody who stayed with us, because everybody stayed with us from the start to the end, which is always a good sign, means that people were absolutely riveted. And if anyone has got any other questions and they want to ask Fred, then perhaps I can give them your email. And we look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. This will be on the website, recorded on our website, and so people can view it again if they wish. Good? Okay, that's great. Thanks a lot, Fred. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.